The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies is the conclusion to the journey of Bilbo and the Dwarf Company that culminates in the titular battle. And I certainly have to say that while the film is the most flawed of the franchise, it's certainly the most riveting at the same time. And such an essence is brought about by Peter Jackson's ability to create moments within the film, moments that are both physically and emotionally on a large scale. And such moments really reinforce the stakes of what's going on within the story and are placed well in what I believe is an incredibly fast-paced film. In fact, relentless at times, which might not work within the grander scheme of the trilogy but works well as a self-contained story, however contrasting my next point. That there are certain elements that work well within the trilogy but not necessarily in the self-contained story. In fact, there's great abruptness within the film, including the opening of the film itself, and certain character arcs almost begin halfway. This leading to a lack of wholesomeness that this film could not provide as other installments in the franchise managed to do so. Furthermore, certain storylines of auxiliary characters get undeserved focus and undue attention, especially those of the characters of Lake Town. While their purpose in the larger story is understood, it's not put across particularly entertainingly, because the film really strives when it focuses on the protagonist Bilbo and the Dwarf Company, people that we are familiar with and at the same time are far more interestingly presented.
You've won the mountain, is that not enough? Now, we defend it.
And I certainly believe that it is Thorin Oakenshield's arc within the film that really drives most of the story. In fact, we get to witness a man who is certainly not as we've seen before. He's far more greedy, he's less of the brave and bold king that we know him to be, and really witnessing him to try and come back to reality, if you will, is something almost beautiful. That, coupled with Bilbo's courageous turn in this film, is really what had me from the get-go. And it is these arcs that lead into one of what I believe is certainly the most entertaining cinematic experiences I've seen in a while. Because it is during this battle that we get to witness an almost perfect blend of action, motivation, and emotion, really showing some of the genius that is really behind this film.
These bats are bred for one purpose. For war.
Leave Sauron to me.
And while the film is certainly sophisticated in almost all regards, unfortunately, from a visual perspective, there are certain moments where, and especially the visual effects, are rather noticeable, if you will, and aren't necessarily up to the mark that one would expect from a film like this. And I don't necessarily know whether it is just the view of this single film or in fact the culmination of the entire fatigue with regards to the trilogy that a lot of people seem to have, that I managed to view this film from a slightly different perspective, observing its flaws to say the least, observing it in a far more critical manner, but yet at the same time I can acknowledge that I absolutely enjoyed this experience. It's a film that certainly turns up the element of both bizarreness and in fact silliness to a certain degree with regards to its humor. In fact, there are certain moments that I can understand that are unintentionally laughable to some while they weren't necessarily to me. Furthermore, I do believe that while the film is filled with flaws, ultimately it really manages to hit at the right moments, thereby giving a far more riveting and of course emotionally driving experience than I could have possibly imagined. Ultimately, The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies is a film with almost obvious flaws and issues, but at the same time, these issues that water down the experience are barely able to do so because the experience in and of itself stands up at a pretty high level. And it's the conclusion to a franchise that I will most certainly miss, because I'm going to give The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies a double yes.
How shall this day end?